Okay, so I am going to do a very brief introduction of Alan Hershkowitz, or Dr. Alan Hershkowitz, who is a true legend of the green sports movement, and we are really lucky to have him here. He is an Eco Athletes Hall of Famer as well, um, and he is really, without Alan, I don't know any of you because without Alan, I'm not in this space because this is 12 years ago now. Alan was speaking at a New York Better Business Bureau meeting. I was like exploring green sports and not sure where there was even a place for me in it. I didn't really know, but I heard Alan talk and I was like, I go up and talk to him afterwards and I'm like, I want to do what you're doing. And it wasn't exactly, I didn't fill the same role as him. Clearly, I'm not an environmental scientist, and Alan will go through it. But Alan inspired me, which inspired me to start a green sports blog and then eventually Eco Athlete. So I know you guys because I know Alan. And Alan and so many people in this space can say that just with their own personal stories. So with that, and because Alan has a lot to present, and then I want there to be plenty of time for questions and Q&A, I hand it over to my friend, my brother in this, Dr. Alan Hershkowitz. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks, really, for blessing me with the opportunity to speak with everybody tonight. And blessings to all of you for joining this conversation. If you're on this Zoom call, it's because you have humanitarian intentions. You want to help alleviate human suffering. You want to help alleviate the suffering of all species. So, blessings to you. Bravo to you. I'm going to share some information with you that will is we need you to succeed as ambassadors outside the family. The most influential role models are athletes and entertainers in that order. Athletes are the most influential role models outside of the family, and for you to be using whatever visibility you have to help promote climate literacy, environmental literacy, social justice, poverty alleviation, hunger alleviation, whatever, to use your platform for those humanitarian intentions. Just want to acknowledge that and say blessings to you. It's wonderful to be able to share some information with you. Some of you are new to the Eco Athletes. And what I want to do is I'm going to just quickly, I want you to know you're part of a movement that's been going on now for a couple of decades. I first started doing work with the Philadelphia Eagles, explain that, later, started their program back in 2004. And I'm going to go through very quickly, just a quick history of when different leagues started their environmental programs. Then I'm going to get into some more substantive stuff that is important for you to know. And I'm going to finish up with a discussion of certain things we should not say, terminology to avoid. And I provide that information. I'm the environmental science advisor to the Yankees. I'm the science advisor to the NBA and Major League Soccer. And so I'm going to share my screen now and show you something. It's this. All right, and we're going to do slideshow. Yeah, view slideshow. And I'm going to minimize that. Okay. Can everybody see that? Can someone answer? Can anybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so there's a lot of slides. I'm going to go through some of this stuff quickly. Obviously, there will be Q&A afterwards, but let me just go through some stuff. Okay, let's see. All right. So basically, as all the leagues have sustainability, programs, environmental programs. The NFL back in the Super Bowl started with recycling. It was not an environmental program generally for the league, but it really was the first purposeful use of a sporting event to promote recycling literacy. And many of you may know Jack and Susan Grow, and Jim Steek was, at this chief operating officer at the NFL. The IOC in 1999 adopted the Olympic movement's Agenda 21. That was really the first time it started to incorporate sustainability and sustainable development into the criteria that they were going to evaluate host cities by. And then in Major League Baseballs, we started the program, the Commissioner's Initiative on Sustainable Ballpark Operations. I created that with Bud Selig, started that. We met in 2005, and we publicly announced it in 2007. The Commissioner's Initiative on Sustainable Ballpark Operations led well, actually, then, by the way, also in 2007, the IOC updated its guide on sport and sustainable development. So it became even more substantially refined and relevant to the ecological issues that, different continents were facing. The NBA, following the lead with Bud Selig, actually it was through Bud Selig that I got introduced to NBA. NBA Green started in 2007. These programs still exist at these leagues. So you should see that there's just a history. At the time that we started the NBA program, the NHL shared 9 arenas with the NBA. So I got invited to meet Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, and we started NHL Green as well. In 2007, we got a cover story in Sports Illustrated. I'll show you the cover in a second. But I came into my office one afternoon in 2007. There was a note saying, Alan, Billie Jean King wants to meet with you. Call Pam at this number. I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. Billy said, hey, they just named the National Tennis Center after me. I know what you're doing with baseball and basketball and hockey. Would you be willing to meet to do something for the USTA? So back in 2008, Billie Jean, myself, Alana Kloss, uh, Gordon Smith, many people at the USTA, we created the environmental program for the USTA. Now, just check this out. This was cover of Sports Illustrated 18 years ago. This is 2007, March of 2007. There's a long story of how we finally got this cover done, which I don't have much time to go through a lot of slides, so I'm not going to digress on that. It's an interesting story. But the point is, if you see the very bottom of this cover of Sports Illustrated, it says time to pay attention. And this was back in 2007. And as you're gonna see from some of the information I'm gonna provide you, actually, we didn't really pay good attention to what needed to be done. Major League Soccer started the program in 2009 and worked on that with Don Garber. NASCAR also, yep, had environmental program in NASCAR Green. I actually was on a panel with Al Gore and Brian France, the owner of NASCAR, and General Wesley Clark. We did this big NASCAR Green announcement. And look, everybody, there's no big answer to the ecological crisis we're facing. Everybody, whatever they're doing, has to, do better, even NASCAR. And of course, all colleges, I don't need to tell you all that. Colleges all, throughout the United States all have programs. And of course, in 2018, the UN Sport for Climate Action Framework created the COP, the Conference of Parties, the climate conference in 2018 where the Sport for Climate Action Framework was created, adopted, and actually, I was on the steering committee for, helping to create the Sport for Climate Action Framework. The Yankees became the first North American team to join the Sport for Climate Action Framework. We did an on-field ceremony. That gentleman, all the way to the left, is Doug Behar. He's the senior VP who runs Yankee Stadium, and next to him is Sachi Tripathi, and then the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, and the Yankees manager and myself. And then following the Yankees joining the UN Sport for Climate Action Framework, the NBA did. And the 5 principles, the principles of the Sport for Climate Action Framework, you have to report your emissions annually. You have to be committed to a greenhouse gas management program. You have to be willing to use your visibility as a venue or a team to promote climate action. You have to commit to improvements, and you have to commit to doing all this publicly. So, why are they doing this? You don't get to be the commissioner of baseball or the NBA because, you're stupid. I mean, these people pay attention to science. Science is not just another opinion. And in fact, from a business perspective, there is a strong business case. This came from the Harvard Business Review, actually, more than 5 years ago. And, corporate boards of directors must tackle questions about sustainability in a new and urgent manner. If they don't, they will hear from investors about their lack of action. Go down to the last sentence. In order to fulfill their obligations, every listed company board now must become sustainability fluent. And climate impacts, generate risks to assets, and investors need to know about this. And what was a good to have is now become an essential corporate management obligation. This, okay? You know that sustainability is, ESG, environment, social governance, economic, environment, social governance. They're all interdependent. Um, and yeah, okay, but now just okay. Now we're going to get into some, to talk about some a little bit more specifics. But as ambassadors for this work, as educated people who actually respect science and understand, economics and have some, social justice ethics and whatnot, you've got good intentions. You've got humanitarian intentions. Okay, you wouldn't be on this call if you didn't have humanitarian intentions and desires. Work is about money and meaning. It's a lot easier to make money than find meaningful things, and you're finding it. All I want to say is that the ruthlessness of the market does not go away because we have good intentions. We have to outcompete the bad stuff. I've been turned down by a major league asking for 1 penny additional to a ticket price to create a climate fund, and I was told those pennies add up, and I was rejected. I was, for in a different context once, working on CD discs, rejected for a change in the type of technology that would have involved 1/4 of a penny, per CD disc. And they said, no, we can't do that. So you have to figure out how to outcompete the market, outcompete the bad stuff. You got to keep your principles, but okay, now just to remind you, what we're dealing with here, and this is important. This is, you probably know all this. Environmental impact is population times consumption times technology. Okay, so population is going up over 200,000, about 220,000 people every day. On the planet, more people on the planet, every 6 weeks is basically another New York City's worth of population. So population is going up. Consumption, government consumption, personal consumption, of course, it's going up because the whole economy is dependent on increasing consumption. And the nature of that consumption, the attributes of what is being consumed is determined by the technology that is used to manufacture what we consume. And so again, environmental impact is population is going up, consumption is going up, technology is still wedded overwhelmingly to environmentally, frankly, ignorant technologies, overwhelmingly on fossil fuels, as I'll tell you about in a second. But one of the consequences of the increasing impacts that we are having through more population and more consumption and still being wedded to environmentally ignorant technology is that we are instigating what is being called the sixth extinction. As ambassadors to eco-athletes, biodiversity and climate change and plastics, these are, the three really big themes that, I would encourage you to, continue to read more and more about. And I'll be suggesting some things that you could read, as well as, what you're already doing. And with all due respect to all the good stuff that you already know. And you know about this, but basically, we're basically, estimates are that we could be wiping out a species every 20 minutes. And that, conservation biologists, including reputable people like, E.O. Wilson, some of the most brilliant conservation biologists have, just been documenting that we're at between 100 and 1,000-fold increase in species extinction rates compared to historic times. Three species an hour every 20 minutes, that's 72 species a day. That's more than 10,000 species a year, that, this is happening. And it depends on what we consume. And, of course, climate impacts are worsening, the habitat disruption and, of course, floods and storms and fires. And actually, the sports greening movement, when I started with the Philadelphia Eagles football team, it was because I was working in the Southeast United States, in Appalachia, and the Southeast United States hosts the most biologically diverse temperate forests in the world. We were working to protect those forests from being converted into toilet paper. Some of the most ecologically rare forests on the planet, that had existed for hundreds and hundreds of years were being cut down to make a product that was being used for 3 seconds or 5 seconds. And back in 2004, when I was asked to work with the Philadelphia Eagles football team, we discovered that their bathroom tissue, which was then being sold, bought by them by Kimberly Clark, was coming from an ecologically important forest. And to its credit, the Eagles immediately switched the supply of their bathroom tissue. And from that, we created the first on purpose sport venue environmental education program. And it started with toilet paper. And you can see here the World Wildlife Fund biological distinctiveness map. Now, of course, these are just, they're not really granular. You get more and more specific and go down to species. But this is the area from which that red area in the bottom right is where that's the most biologically diverse temperate forest. And also, it is the wood supply capital one of the wood supply capitals of the world. And as a result, it's hosting some of the highest concentrations of endangered and peril species. We call that area a biogem. So, as an eco athlete ambassador, when you start recommending environmentally better practices, and we talk about better practices, not best practices, because who knows what the best is, but everybody could do better. And you don't want to get into arguments about what's best, but I actually was in an audience with the Pope, God bless him, and this is Francis, and he said to everybody in the room, "Do better." So Emerson said the ideal is better, not the best, better. So basically, where is your wood products coming? Where is your paper coming from? The paper industry is one of the largest industrial generators of global warming pollution. It's one of the largest consumers of fresh water. It's one of the largest industrial pressures on forests. Paper products have to actually were fundamental to the launch of the Green Sports Alliance, and all the environmental programs at the leagues were concerned about their bathroom tissue, their yearbooks, their game day programs, their media guides. Okay, in terms of population times consumption times technology, this is another little fact about the technology. This is why I say that we're still wedded to environmentally ignorant technologies, because overwhelmingly, basically four-fifths of the power consumed in the world is coming from fossil fuels. And that's not a great thing. Back in 2022, when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is one of the greatest tributes to human science and human ingenuity. I mean, literally hundreds, thousands of scientists from hundreds of countries around the world, from every scientific field, biology, chemistry, engineering, geology, anthropology, whatever, economics, they come together to assess the potential, effects of climate disruption on on life. And what they pointed out, and this is now going back, 3 years ago, is without immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is beyond reach. Now, we are at that number already, basically, for all intents and purposes. So, yeah, limiting it to be, whatever, we contribute is going to take us beyond that. And in fact, this is really important for people to remember, especially when we hear people, out at the end of this, I'm going to be talking about greenwashing terminology. Okay, you don't want to overstate your achievements. You don't want to misrepresent how hard it is to make these changes. The work we're doing is incredibly challenging and difficult. If you want to help alleviate human suffering or suffering of all species, you're going to suffer, because understanding the causes of it, experiencing it, witnessing it, as you get more and more into this work, you're going to learn more and more and more. And it is, it is, I cry, I cry, I'm an empath and I experience empathic distress. And, so, we're still, emissions are still going up. Okay. They're going up in many cases at a slower rate, but they are still going up. And the UN is telling us that we need emissions to go down, to be going down, okay, dramatically down. And, just an observation here is that, achieving that kind of reduction, a 50% reduction by 2030 or net zero by 2040 or 2050 would be difficult, even if everybody was working in good faith. And I think it's fair to say that not everybody is working in good faith on this issue. And now basically it is really impossible uh, to cut, in my estimation, that, to be able to cut, emissions for, scopes one, two, three by 2030, you know, uh, um, by half and, or achieve net zero by 2040. This is, what science is telling us is necessary, but the market does not operate like, with respect to science. Um, okay, now just as a reminder, when people ask you, what can I do? What's the next step? You're going to be interacting with, organizations, with sponsors, with vendors, with, businesses maybe you're investing in. Okay, the first and most important thing is the leader, support from leadership. Bud Selig, the commissioner of baseball, took me by the shoulders in 2005 and he said, Alan, whatever you need, you let me know. David Stern, when he, passed on, I wrote that he was one of the greatest environmentalists in the history of sports. Gary Bettman, the commissioner of baseball. Of course, Billie Jean King. Even Roger Goodell has spoken about climate. I mean, that leadership message, working with like Bob Nutting at the Pittsburgh Pirates, what a dream it is. I mean, to have an owner who is, totally literate in environmental and climate science and committed, to ethical merging of science and ethics. So, support from leadership is the most important attribute. This comes from Bob Willard. I encourage you to look into Sustainability Advantage. That is a resource, a data resource, an information resource that Bob and Marshall Willard, two of the great sustainability experts, practitioners, and writers. If you're looking for some good resource, Sustainability Advantage is, a good thing to subscribe to. And this comes, from Bob and Marcia's work and senior leadership support, employee engagement, which is so complicated. Working with global organizations, and these teams in the venue very complex. So many different relationships, marketing, legal, sponsorship, operations, uh, philanthropy. So there's a reason why things are taking a long time. It's not because people aren't trying to make it work. It's just because the stuff is complicated. So establishing clear goals and metrics and internal communication is critical. I try to write things for a seventh grader, really try to make things, like as you'll notice, my slides don't have, many uh, a lot of text on it, the visual representation of data and information, how you represent information. These are skills that continue as ambassadors for eco athletes, as people engaged in this space, as business people wanting to communicate your business advantages or your, and your goals. Um, why they fail. Well, if you don't put in the resources, if you have too many competing priorities, if culture change challenges. I have to say that despite the change in the administration, presidency, all the organizations that I work with, and I work with a lot of them, not one of them has retreated from commitment on shifting towards more and more low carbon energy sources and more environmental justice and climate justice and responsibility. So,
I just want to add one thing,
yeah,
which is that I'm I've experienced the same thing with eco athletes, and that our athletes, our champions, as exemplified by those who are here, uh, are stepping into the, you know, they're not stepping back. which is extremely heartening in, in with all these headwinds. So so it's
Yeah,
also coming from the athlete side. I will now mute myself again.
yeah, don't despair, but if you must despair, work on. Yeah. Okay. So, one thing I want you to come away with is that the ruthlessness of the market doesn't go away because you have good intentions. Okay. You gotta, outcompete the bad stuff in terms of price, fashion, performance, all those things. Also, we're constantly there's more sorrow coming our way than happiness in terms of information flow. Don't despair, but if you must despair, work on. That's it. Churchill said, when you're going through hell, just keep going. All right. Don't despair, but if you must despair, work on. Just persevere. Okay. Um, I'm not, this too shall pass, but when, who knows? But, when Martin Luther King said that the arc of history bends towards justice, I totally believe that, but he also said, but it doesn't get there by itself. We have to make it happen. And he did say that that's going to be a challenge, and it is a challenge. Um, Bottom line, I don't want to get into too many details about sustainability, vision, planning. There's books on this stuff, but you do need to have a vision. And you need leadership to support and endorse that vision. And you need to articulate your sustainability vision to your colleagues, to those who are sponsoring you, to those from whom you're buying things, to those who you're working with, and the rationale behind it. And if look, this is the Paris Agreement. These are the aspirations, scientific. We call it. We aspire to these, with the Sport for Climate Action framework. It used to be that you pledged to achieve it, but that was actually turning people off because some of these organizations didn't want to pledge to do something that they knew that was really out of their control. So much of Scope 3 is out of our control. So now it's framed as an aspiration. Okay, and when we talk about carbon neutral and net zero, we aspire to those things, but they are fundamentally, from an industrial ecology, a biogeochemical, engineering perspective, those terms are not static plateaus that can be accomplished. Okay, we aspire to those things, but they're basically unachievable in any ongoing, consistent, forever way. So we just aspire to keeping our emissions towards those goals. And then I'm going to close with, basically this and a few things, avoid superlatives. Okay. If I'm advising the Yankees, and I am, or the Pittsburgh Pirates, or I am, or, talking with the Intuit Dome, who I advise, or, the NBA, I got to protect them from environmental branding liabilities because it's critical to be authentic. Okay, these organizations have credibility because they're authentic. And you can't have the Yankees exaggerating or the NBA exaggerating accomplishments on climate change. And quite the opposite. What we find more productive is to let people know how challenging it is and ask people to join us in the struggle to overcome those challenges. If we were carbon neutral, we wouldn't need anyone's help, but that's not reality. So, instead of saying sustainable, that this is a sustainable product or this is a sustainable event, you could be more sustainable. Again, avoid superlatives. And, let me just remind you that these are the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so I mentor people every week, and everybody wants to be in sustainability and sustainable. I say, well, what do you want to do? A lot of them use the word sustainable development, almost as a euphemism for climate action. But when I was mentoring someone from Yale's Divinity School who wanted to be the sustainability advisor for the Boston Red Sox, I said, well, you're coming from the Divinity School. Why don't you go alleviate poverty, which is Sustainable Development Goal number one, or alleviate hunger, which is, SDG number two, and work for those organizations and then build partnerships with sports and organizations. So you can work with the Red Sox, go work for a poverty alleviation organization and form a partnership. I worked with the Red Sox back in 2007, 2008. I was involved in the putting in of solar panels, 28 solar panels. By the way, over the course of my career, I had been asked to throw out four first pitches. And I played baseball in high school, so I did okay on that. But just throwing that in there as a personal thing. And so I know a lot of these venues, and they have phenomenal philanthropic and community, social, social impact programs that are all fundamental to dealing with climate. I mean, we can't look at gender equality, SDG number 5. More than half the food in the world, I understand, is grown by small scale women farmers. Most of the food grown in the world is grown by women. And they don't get the economic and technical and political resources. In fact, as we know, women and girls and the elderly are the most disproportionately at risk subgroup populations as a result of disruptions from climate. Carbon neutral, it can be aspired to, but here, this is actually a slide that I modified from a book I wrote on the paper industry. But basically, this is a LCI, a life cycle inventory of a plastic straw. So basically, if when people say this is carbon neutral or net zero, the image that occurs is that there is no carbon impact associated with this product from raw material acquisition through use and disposal. And we know that that is not possible. And if you look at the LCI, not to be confused with the LCA, a life cycle assessment is an LCI with an assessment attached to it that identifies ways to reduce the impacts. An LCI is basically more or less straightforward data and qualitative descriptions of impacts without the assessment component. This would be an LCI image. And so when you think about carbon neutral and net zero, recognize that this is dynamic. This is, it's on a chart right now, but all of these little lines, relate to activities, business activities, government activities, consumers, producers. Same with net zero. So we can aspire to these things. We must aspire to these things, but don't use it as like I'm net zero, I'm carbon neutral. There are companies selling carbon neutral labels. Compostable, if your material is compost certified, you got to indicate, is it compostable at home or commercially compostable? And if it can't be composted in your town, it's not compostable. And I bring this up because there's less than 200 high volume commercial composters in the entire United States. Composting is one of the most important things we could do by diverting food waste and organics from landfills and incinerators, where those food waste and organics wind up as greenhouse gas emissions. So composting, which results in much, much, much fewer emissions than those alternatives, is an underdeveloped technology. But you can't claim something is compostable if it's not going to be composted in your location. Biodegradable, that's an okay term, but ecologically, I mean, it's important if a turtle or a marine mammal or anything gets entangled in plastic that, it will at some point degrade quicker than something that's not biodegradable. But verification of biodegradability, and certainly in a marine environment, and the degradation rate, how quickly it degrades, and also does it affect recycling programs, because many things that are biodegradable can't get recycled. So it's not, you know, I'm not going to get too much into this. I'm going to, because this is not, this is stuff that you could read in the book. But basically, we know we're at 1.5 degrees, and then I'm going to skim through this because I don't really want to get into what it looks like at 4 degrees increase, which is the direction we're on. I do want to emphasize, of course, to remind you about measuring scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. You need to understand those measurement categories. Scope 1 is what's happening on site, what's coming out of your boiler on site, what you own, the cars you own and drive, the airplanes you own, what you own. Scope 2 is the utility, what comes over the fence, the power from your supplier. Oil, coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar. Scope 3 is everything else. Majority of your emissions are definitely scope 3. Transportation, waste, aviation, textiles, food, plastics, water, food, agriculture impacts paper on. So the challenge is, according to the science, we got to reduce from a 2019 baseline by 2050. As I said before, unfortunately, emissions are still going in the other direction, and net zero by 2040 or 2050. The strategy is just keep measuring, measure comprehensively, measure your emission categories, reduce, replace petroleum-based fuels and plastics. And then I'll leave you with, Antonio Gutierrez, actually, that is maybe spelled, I think, wrong there, but, sleepwalking into a climate catastrophe. No country, no corporation can insulate itself from these levels of chaos. Climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals, but the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels. Now is the time to stop burning up our planet, and start investing in abundant renewable energy. And that is it, folks. And thank you for the opportunity to present to you.
Thank you, Alan. And then if you can
Yeah, let me figure that out. Let me just
uh,
figure that out.
just stop share.
Yeah, let me get to it. Where, where? Hmm. And show. All right.
Let's see if I can. I think I can do this by revoking your co-host permission.
That's cool.
No, that didn't do it. Well,
Hang on a second. Oh, wait, up here. Stop sharing.
there
There
we
we
go.
go. Sorry about that, guys.
All right. So, Alan, athletes know the score. I would say that is something that they see in their game all the time. You gave the score. Now I want to hear from the champions here. And actually, two champions came on while Alan was taking us through the presentation. Um, both of them are Cornell basketball players, and both of them have two initials in their first name, AJ LeBeau and DJ Nix. You guys, if you can't put on your video, no problem. But welcome aboard. Any questions to get started? And unmute yourself. You can raise your hand physically. You can do a hand raise, um, or anyone want to get started?
Hi. Can I ask about the scope one, two, and three, say accounting processes for that? How would you describe exactly how companies, um, I guess, provide all of their emissions reports and include scope one, two, and three? Because I've read that it's pretty difficult to um, get all scope three emissions accounted for, if that makes sense. Do you mind going into that?
Yeah, so when I first met with Bud Selig in 2005, and I said, look, why don't we just start by measuring, because, if you asked how many home runs Babe Ruth hit against a lefty on a Tuesday, they could give you that information in 3 minutes. But if you ask how much energy was being consumed at baseball stadiums, they didn't know. So I said, why don't we just measure, your green. And I said, "Well, we could take the next 5 years." And he said, 5 years, we could do it quicker than that. They're still figuring out how to do it. Okay, that's 20 years later. Okay, they now actually have formed a partnership with a sponsor that's attempting to do it for certain emission categories. But look, there are category lists for scope one. Scope one is actually for a sports venue or an entertainment venue. Um, there's a known list of emission categories. It could be lawn maintenance equipment, it could be your chillers, it could be if you're making energy on site. And scope two is you power off from over the fence. So you're absolutely right. Scope three is enormously complicated, not only in its diversity and its complexity in terms of supply chain and how you figure out the boundaries of what you're going to include in the measurement, who owns the greenhouse gas impact. There's a greenhouse gas protocol. There's a number of greenhouse gas protocols. There's many different types, and each impact has an emission factor. So you have to align emission factors. Whose emission factors are you going to use? There, like anything, it's not without debate. So there's certain degree of uncertainty in all of this that you just have to accept. But you do the best that you can, and some of the analytical tools are very, very refined. But when you're talking about forest products industry, when you're talking about plastics and textiles, the supply chains, food. I was on the sustainability advisory board for a large food and beverage company that sourced its fish in North America from 800 different sources. Okay. And you want to measure that, and they were looking to make sure that they were all ethically acquired and legally acquired. And then you try to measure the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the acquisition of that food product. It's very, very complicated. You're absolutely right. There are, brilliant people working on it. I use dashboards. These are KPI, key performance indicator, eco dashboards. Um, you know, the major accounting firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, they have dashboards that they market. There's independent companies like Gravity that markets dashboards. I use one with the Yankees and with, some Broadway, theaters. That's from an organization called Green to Sustainable. I'm not, telling you which data dashboard to use, but and there's very specific protocols on what gets measured and what you own. If you pay for it, typically you own that greenhouse gas emission, but it is a complicated task. And every year we have to report those, whatever data we can, to the UN. So I help prepare the report to the UN for the Yankees and for the NBA and for others. And there's a lot, but you have to be honest. You can't misrepresent your achievements and your complicated. The best thing to do is identify what the challenges are so that you could get information from others about how they're navigating those challenges. I can tell you that in my work, even though the data dashboards that I use can capture over 400 different emission categories, I'm rarely using more than 15 on a regular basis and mostly even less than 10 in terms of, when I review the data with operations people. Because that's the point. The point is not to capture data. The point is to use the data to identify opportunities for reduction of your impacts. So, taking figuring out how those data connect to your operations and your sponsorships and your vendors, okay, and your regulatory requirements. The Yankees are subject to more environmental laws than any team in the United States, being located in New York City. Goes for the Mets and the Madison Square Garden and Barclays also. It's a long answer to.
Great question, but great question, Quincy.
Thank you. And it's a great answer. Thank you so much. That helped.
More question. I see DJ. First of all, DJ, who wears the same number as MJ, as in Michael Jordan, and I've heard him say that he is almost as good.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. He definitely has me. He has me beat. First of all, thank you for talking. Thank you for speaking to us. I'm here with me and AJ are here. We're here together. So we're doing this meeting together. But I guess I had a question for you, and he'll have his own. But you talk about us being the sixth extinction events. And obviously that's not anything that any of us want to hear, being on the planet and stuff like that. And we can always do our part in recycle and turn off the electricity to cut, just cut those small things. But I was just wondering if there's any big like change that we could do maybe on our own that maybe I'm missing, or something that you would know from your research that's like something underrated, but if we started doing it now and applying it to our school and telling our friends that could help.
Yeah, yeah, and by the way, I always had hope. Optimism is a different category. That depends on what data we're referring to. But I certainly always have hope, and but awareness is the first step towards healing. So I didn't mean to be a doomsayer or anything like that, and I hope I didn't offend anybody in anything I said. That wasn't my intention. But understanding, the threats realistically is, important for us to begin to heal it. To your point, to your question, Mother Teresa said there are no great things, only small things with great love. The situation we're in is the result of literally millions and millions of environmentally ignorant decisions that have been made for a couple of hundred years, maybe more. Now we need millions of environmentally intelligent decisions. We need 1 million electricians in the United States to deal with all the solar and the electrification. So to your point, there is no big thing to do, but if you own a home, can you put in heat pumps? Can you, reduce your consumption of fossil fuels at home? Can you lower your thermostat? Look, one of the biggest and most important things to do is reduce industrial meat. If, right now I'm talking to you from Montana, and there are some grass-fed, bison or cattle here that are done with regenerative agriculture. That scale of the market at that scale is very limited, frankly, compared to, industrial meat. There are folks, I eat meat, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a month, maybe 5 times, and sometimes less. I mean, there's folks who eat meat 3 times a day. So, maybe again, do better, reduce the consumption of meat, because it's a big, carbon emitter. It's a big ecological impact. There's a lot of humane issues as well, and pollution issues. If you can, ride a bike or use mass transit or walk if you are in a walkable place, that's a good thing to do. Of course, I mean, again, um, you know, what you're driving. You can't tell people to just switch to an electric car. That's a big investment. But if you are going to buy a car, think about one that, can be plugged in, has a plug-in component. Civilization has its costs, and that is the reality. And, for the most part, this is why this conversation is so meaningful because we're sharing, information, and we tend to, be governed by many who are scientifically illiterate. And so another thing, Catherine Hayhoe, who is an evangelical scientist, one of the most famous climate scientists, is an evangelical, and she says, she has said she's actually upped it a little bit, but she used to say that the most important thing to do for climate change is to talk about it. Get people to understand it. It really is, a serious, real, it's not a figment of our imagination. We are destabilizing the functional integrity of the biosphere. Okay, we are undermining the chemistry of the atmosphere. We are, acidifying the oceans. We are, wiping out some of the most ecologically rare forests, on the planet. Those are all realities. And, what we buy and how we consume things and what we market, in sport in particular, every industry, this is why, look, I love tennis, I love basketball, I love going to a baseball game. I really enjoy soccer, whatever, but, I'm not involved with sports because I'm a sportif. I'm in it because when was reading Unscientific America, a book by Chris Mooney, and I was reading this, 20 years ago, and he said 17% of Americans, 13% of Americans follow science. And I said, wow, how many people follow sports? At that time, back in 2005, 73% followed sports. Now, less than 20% of adult Americans follow science, but over 80% regularly follow sports. In every city, there's a newspaper, there's a sports section. Every newspaper has a sports section. They don't all have a science section. And people pay attention to folks like you athletes, regardless of whatever level you're at. There's a certain stature and, there's certain earned stature, to be at a level of athletic accomplishment that you folks have achieved indicates certain capabilities. You're not going to suddenly become stupid. There's a certain intelligence and grace and elegance and strength and strategy that all go, that is just understood to be, at the level of athleticism that you folks engage in, advance. So, that's why people listen to you, and that's why it's important. Look, I briefed Billie Jean King, I briefed Venus Williams, I mean, it was great. They did videos on climate and on organics and recycling. And, at the time when I was, working with Venus, she was number one in the world, and she used her platform to be on the Jumbotron at the US Open to tell people to use mass transit.
And that is, to interject, that is the ethos of eco athletes. And that, so what Alan said, the most important thing you do is talk. And what you guys have that most humans don't is a megaphone. And that megaphone, and not gonna like, we're not Michael Jordan. I know DJ accepted, but we're not Michael Jordan. We don't have that megaphone yet. However, this is what we are building here. And
Let's hear from Ridian.
yes, Ridian in Japan for Australia in the World Track and Field Championships. Give it up for Ridian, who is a two-time, no, three-time Olympian or two.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have to go through my entire resume. I suppose a bit more like on the philosophical side, particularly noting there's a few people here in their first eco athletes chat and or community chat, and they've just joined, I guess, the big gang that we have here. You've been in green sports for a long time, I guess. Like, how have you managed to, I guess, keep that energy up over such a long time? And then also with climate change and climate action being such a big thing and there's so many things to do, like how have you, I guess, picked what to prioritize at particular times?
How have I been able to sustain doing what I'm doing? Is that the question, or
I guess it's a two questions. So there's that, and then also like given how broad, like how many options there are in terms of taking climate action, how have you picked what to prioritize as well at particular times?
right? Yeah. Okay. So the kind of science that I do is it's industrial science, but there's also, I mean, there's social science, but I do what's called industrial ecology, and which looks at technologies, in a very granular way to, evaluate material flows. The question is, for me, what is most doable? Okay. Your question basically is how, if I heard it right, what criteria do I use to decide what to do? Because the issues are so big and diverse. And the trends right now are actually worsening. So how do you decide what to do? I am very opportunistic when it comes to accepting a result. I will take, I worked for months on the straws that were used at the Super Bowl at the SoFi Stadium to change them from a petroleum-based straw to a straw made from the fermentation of canola oil. And we got those straws changed for that one game. That actually did lead, small things can lead to big effects. That led to the Yankees actually using that straw. And now that straw, I was recently on Maui, and I was at a hotel, visiting hotel. Wasn't staying at the hotel, but they were using that straw. So what is most doable? It may not, what is most necessary often takes the most time. So I want to get results, okay? And you never know, little things can lead to big results. Like when I worked on toilet paper with the Philadelphia Eagles, that led to a conversation I had the next year that resulted in me meeting the commissioner of baseball because I worked on toilet paper for one stadium. I was able to use that conversation to get myself introduced to the commissioner of baseball, who coincidentally turned out to be a great environmentalist. His daughters were environmentalists. His wife Sue was an environmentalist. He took me by the shoulders. He said, "Whatever you need, you let me know. I love what you were doing." And we created the first professional sports league sustainability program. And it was really to measure energy use, initially. And, we did do that. And we found, the Cardinals reduced their energy by 24%. We put solar panels on Fenway. Um, the Pirates, the Yankees saved money on shifting to LEDs. So we were helping them, if you could find ways to save money, the business case, that's critical. So what's doable and what is the strongest business case? Um, because, if you could figure out to get a sponsor or to make this a more efficient, cost-cutting initiative, then you can get in the apartment, you can get in the building. If you want to get in the apartment, there's a lot of steps before you get into the apartment, then you sit down for dinner. Before you get to sit down for dinner on these conversations, operational changes, you just got to get in the building. And the way to get in the building is, if there's money to be made, sponsors to be had, revenue to be saved, efficiencies to be enhanced. That's why measurement is so valuable, because unless you measure, you don't know. And when you ask to measure, you're not asking them to change their vendors or to change anything, just measure. So it's not an operational threat or logistical hurdle. But there are many, many, many implementation barriers that unless you're working in the building, you're really not, attuned to. So there's a lot of conversation happening about the need for sports and sport events to change. And of course they do. Everybody does. Everything needs to change. But there has to be a focus on what is in the way of getting that change. And one of the things also is, voting for people who recognize that this is a real issue. We need scientifically literate government officials. And I'm not saying Republican or Democrat. I'm just saying that whoever is the one that is speaking sense, that respects science and that understands, the issue and scientifically and ethically, that's really important.
Any other questions as we're coming up on about an hour? So I want to be respectful of Alan's time and all y'all's time. But we have time for one or two questions. If anyone else would like to, we have AJ raising his hand. AJ,
Hi,
you're up.
I'm AJ, and I had a question with if you've looked at foreign professional team methods of how they recycle, or maybe how they, if you've ever adapted a foreign team's way of recycling, or um, uh,
Right.
doing anything against climate change.
Yeah, yeah. Wait, did you say foreign teams? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
like
Oh,
foreign pro teams. Yeah.
oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, working with the French Open, for, for almost 15 years. And I go to the Australian Open. Yeah. I mean, what's amazing is like at the Australian Open in 2023, they had to dispose of 90,000 plastic bottles. In 2024, they disposed of 400. They switched to giving every player four refillable bottles. They were sponsored by Water Drop. The bottles were wider than this, but this is a 24-ounce one. It was a little wider, and it was gorgeous. Each player got four. The players' coaches got four. All the members of the players' entourage and family got four. And they put in hydration stations, temporary hydration stations throughout the Australian Open grounds that was connected to municipal water, so people could hydrate. It was hot, it was Melbourne in the summer. The French Open similarly changed, got rid of plastic bottles, so did Wimbledon. I was at the US Open last week, and I'm not going to get into it, let's just say it's very, very big. And, the ability for them to look in France and in Australia and in the UK, there are laws. They require them to, Australia just, when I was out there, January, February, they had just adopted a very strong environmental measurement, greenhouse gas measurement mandate. So, and reduction. And in France, I mean, you could get fined like 1,000, don't quote me on the number, but a lot of money giving out plastic bottles at the French Open. They get fined for that. Okay, so you have different recognition, political recognition and urgency of the issue, Here, look, I mean, the Yankees, we're doing everything they possibly can. The Pirates, so NBA, it's amazing how much is getting done. Um, it's a tremendous amount is getting done. Um, a lot of little stuff and some big stuff, putting in new chillers that the Yankees put in, was a big deal. It took a few years to, go from four, you know, 15-year-old chillers to two high efficiency new ones. That takes, that's the whole HVAC system for Yankee Stadium. Changing that is not a small deal. And, it took a while, but it got it done. So, yeah, I mean, for the most part, Europe and I'm actually giving two presentations in Japan this month, for Japan, the sports organizations, because it's really catching on there because of laws, trade laws. The NBA is, I work with the NBA not only in North America, but in Europe and in Asia and South America, Africa. They have to comply with, the environmental laws. So they pick the hard, what's the most rigorous one, and let's just design to that one. So this way we harmonize our operations, our procurement, and whatever to the greatest degree possible to the most environmentally intelligent, protective, severe, however you want to define it, regulation. And these organizations would constantly, learning from each other all the time. I'll be in London in 2 weeks for the Sports Positive event. I'm one of the judges, there, whatever. I won their award last year, but that's beside the point. So yeah, I mean, there's good stuff happening. But look, Delta Airlines, KLM, they got fined for claiming they were carbon neutral, for making environmental claims that couldn't be justified. KLM, I think, was taken up in The Hague. I don't know where the Delta Airlines case went, but they apparently were on the wrong end of that, so you know, you can't linguistically decarbonize. You can't linguistically detoxify. It's got to be real. And, for your own personal brand, I would just say, just be authentic and tell the truth. I mean, I have credibility because, as one, frankly, high level sports person said, Alan, you tell us stuff others don't tell us. Keep doing that. And all I was telling them was stuff that it's a new business management obligation, is understanding the environmental constraints of your market and of your fan base and of your supply chain, and and of your energy costs and your food supply. Everything is being affected, and you can't put your head in the sand. And, folks who are promoting coal, they're on the wrong side of history. It's, that stuff, it's, these delays are really resulting in people, damaging, generationally damaging effects. Um, but, the United States is just part of the world, not all of it. And even within the United States, there's a lot of really good stuff going on, a lot of really good stuff going on at the state and local levels. And, I'm hopeful.
We have time for one more question.
Okay. I have time, Lou. I'm okay. My wife's on a float down the Yellowstone River right now.
Right. And it's 7:40 out where you are now.
Yeah.
Um, any other questions? All right. Well, listen, first of all, uh, Equal Athletes Champions, thank you guys for for your attentiveness, for being here, for your good questions, and for being willing to talk about these issues that Alan has brought to bear in your communities, with your fans, with your supporters, and keep doing it, and we will help. And Alan, uh, thank you so much for the work you've done, for being the straight shooter. Athletes need to know the score, as I said earlier, and they're all about how can I get better the next day. In fact, Gary Gilliam he was the first athlete I spoke to who said, "How do I get better tomorrow? How do I get better tomorrow?" When he was trying to make the Seahawks, who had won the Super Bowl the prior year. And you only know how to get better tomorrow when you know the problems you're facing. And you brought that to us and also the science and also hopefully some ways forward. Alan, I'll leave you with the last word.
Well, I just want to, look, blessings to all of you, infinite blessings to all of you for trying to improve the planet, to improve humanity, to help protect the children of all species. I mean, really, there's nothing more meaningful than trying to help alleviate suffering. Look, work is about money and meaning. I said that earlier, and you're going to all make money. There's no doubt about it. You can, you've made good decisions in your life. Good things happen. There's no reason that's going to change. You're not going to become stupid all of a sudden. You'll continue to make good decisions, but finding meaningful, doing something meaningful, that's harder. And the key thing is you got to handle it emotionally, because you want to save the world today. But it takes time and you want that great job now, to help you save the world, or to advance your career. I tell people give yourself a year and a half for any particular goal that you're establishing. I mean, I like 5-year goals personally for a lot of the stuff that I do, but you know, don't let your mind, there's so much uncertainty in the world, and uncertainty leads to stress, and you're trying to do good things in the context of uncertainty, and there's stress, and some folks are being purposefully unhelpful right now. So, there's a lot coming at you, a lot coming at us. And, the key thing is we got to support each other, help each other, serve, the art of servant leadership. Doesn't have to be this, I've been helping Lou for a long time. I'm happy to help anybody on this call for as long a time. If there's anything I could do to be helpful, just let me know. And thanks for the opportunity. And, and I wish you all good morning, good night, whatever time of the day it is, wherever you are right now. I'll see you
Thank,
in a little.
thank you so much, Alan.
Bye bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And we'll, ah, Quincy, great question.
Oh, thank you.
And what did you guys think?
That
Now,
was amazing. Yeah, I'm so glad we got to hear from him.
how about you, Gary?
I enjoyed it. Very knowledgeable. I'd love to talk to him some more.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just double check with him because we have another one a week from Thursday, um, uh, to be able to get the folks from Europe and in on this. But I want to make sure I can give out. I think I'm sure he will say yes, but I just want to make double sure that I can give out his email address, and then you guys can connect with him. He is he is truly. Uh, there is no one like Alan Hershkowitz in the world, um, and I'm glad that you got to see the full Alan. On and I was really glad that you guys came.
Well, thanks for organizing us to get a chance to hear from him. So,
And we may hopefully get, he mentioned Catherine Hayhoe, like Alan, Catherine Hayhoe, climate scientist, Texas Tech University, the best climate communicator I have ever heard. I'll put her name in the chat. I should have done it while everybody else was on, but whatever. I forgot. Look her up. She, as he said, is a climate scientist and an evangelical, married to an evangelical minister who was a climate change denier when they started dating. And somehow, clearly, he's no longer and a climate denier. And she, because she goes in, her audience are skeptics and deniers. She has to be a great communicator, and she is incredible. And she has spoken to us twice before, in 21 and 24, So I'm going to try and get her around Earth Day in 26. So, and there'll be others between now and then, but just to give you a heads up. Sydney, what did you think?
I mean, he's a visionary. I love that man. I mean, I've met him before, but because of you. But no, it was great. I mean, I really loved the part at the end about, the terminology we use does matter. Um, I'm in a lot of my classes for my master's, we've talked about that. And kind of the dangers of promising net zero because or promising 100% reduction because that's
That's very
not quite feasible right now.
right. Right.
Just the greenwashing and in the sports industry in general is just rampant. So I like that he spoke to that.
And and when he, for me, and this is how I internalize it, and you guys can say, Lou, you're daft. Um, but the way I internalize it is that, and Sydney, you've heard me talk about it this way, but what Alan so rightly shows is the challenges that we have, what I see as the opportunities, because what was that equation that environmental impact equals population plus consumption plus technology, right? I think I got that right. Technology, i.e., climate tech, i.e., solar, i.e., storage, all the technological innovations, even though they're a smaller part of the market than they should be, one thing I would say if I was him is that we have a lot of the technological capabilities that we need. The supply side, if you look at climate solutions as a product, like as Tide detergent or a notebook or anything that you're for which there is a demand curve and a supply curve, right? Microeconomics 101. The supply of climate solutions and technology, that part is where I think we have the best chance of making a real difference, is on a good path. Where we have the lack is, as he's saying, we have bad actors. For whatever reasons, we can go into it, but the lack is the demand side because of environmental ignorance, because of willful misdirection, et cetera, et cetera, we don't have the demand at scale for climate solution, for the supply to match the supply of climate solutions. And athletes, because of your social capital, because of your ability to reach a broader audience, your megaphone can impact that demand side. And I think that's where I'm not over-promising, I'm just saying we have the capability to impact that demand side. And that demand side will then, if we boost the demand side, then that supply is going to increase and there's going to be a faster pace of innovation. So that's where I think athletes can change the world. I now yield the floor. Was that good?
I think so. Once again, thank you so much for coming and thanks for organizing this, Lou. This was awesome.
Yeah, I really thank you all and those who got off the call. It was really cool. So have a great night, y'all.
You as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you, you too.
I'm
And
gonna,
yeah, Lou, actually, I would like to talk to you if you could. Maybe
yeah,
not